In 1982, a young hedge fund manager made a prediction so confident it nearly erased him from finance.
Hello, I'm Ray Dalio.
Ray Dalio was 33 years old. He told every client he had that the United States was heading for the worst economic collapse in modern history. Not a slowdown, not a recession, a depression, worse than anything the world had ever seen. He bet his reputation, his firm, and every dollar he had on a single outcome. Then, nothing happened. No crash, no panic, no vindication. Instead, policymakers intervened, markets stabilized, and Ray Dalio was catastrophically wrong. The trade had failed. The clients left, the staff were gone, and the phone stopped ringing. Within months, he laid off the entire company. He ended up alone in his office, calling his father to borrow $4,000 just to survive. So how does somebody get the world so wrong and still go on to build the most influential hedge fund in history? And why do the most powerful people in finance still hang on his every word today? To understand that, we need to go back to a golf course in Long Island in 1961. Ray was born in 1949 in Queens, New York. His father was a jazz musician and his upbringing was middle class. He wasn't rich and he was certainly not Wall Street royalty. When the family moved to Long Island, a 12-year-old Ray began caddying at a local golf club within walking distance of his home to earn money on the weekend. The people who played there weren't famous, but they controlled capital, and Ray listened closely to their conversations. Two regulars would quietly change his life: George and Isabel Lieb. At the time, Ray didn't know it, but they were deeply embedded in New York's financial elite. "They brought me into their world," said Ray. Ray heard them talking about one company all the time, Northeast Airlines. He didn't understand the business, he didn't understand valuations, but he wanted to be involved. So he bought a handful of shares, and the stock tripled. By the time Ray finished high school, he was hooked on investing. Most people remember their first win, but very few question why it worked. After graduating, Isabel Lieb introduced Ray to contacts on Wall Street, and he landed a summer job in the commodities division of Merrill Lynch. Ray spent time on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Then, in 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold.
"I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets."
Markets exploded, and seeing how credit, fear, and policy moved markets in real time shaped Ray's core belief that the economy followed repeatable patterns. He then began treating markets less like stories and more like systems. After earning his MBA at Harvard, Ray bounced through several trading roles, but big firms felt slow, political, and suffocating. So at 26, he quit. By the time Ray left Wall Street, he no longer thought markets were unpredictable. He thought they were misunderstood. In 1975, Ray founded Bridgewater Associates out of a 2-bedroom apartment. It wasn't a hedge fund yet. It was a research and advisory shop. He basically told companies where markets might go and how to prepare. The seed money for Bridgewater came from people who trusted his thinking: George and Isabel Lieb. Ray was also trading on his own personal account very successfully, and his reputation spread. In fact, McDonald's once asked Ray to help create a trading hedge that kept the ingredients of chicken and chicken feed stable. He did it, and that allowed McDonald's to launch the Chicken McNugget.
McNugget Mania grows!
So the next time you order Chicken McNuggets and fries at McDonald's, you can thank Ray Dalio. Ray married Barbara. His confidence was at an all-time high. But then, just as Bridgewater was finally gaining momentum, at the end of 1981, Ray made the call that nearly destroyed everything. Major countries were defaulting, and Ray believed those debts would create this chain reaction that would collapse the global financial system. When Mexico approached default in the early 1980s, Ray became not just confident, but utterly convinced that a global depression was imminent. But nothing happened, and that depression never materialized. Ray lost all the money he invested. Subsequently, everyone at Bridgewater was laid off. Ray realized his big error wasn't just a one-off bad prediction, It was overconfidence. So he set about rebuilding Bridgewater on a new foundation. Write down the logic behind every decision. Stress test it, seek disagreement, and build processes that catch your blind spots. Meetings were recorded. Feedback was instant. And the disagreement that most companies had wasn't allowed, it was actually expected. It was an intense culture, unlike anything else in the industry. Internally, Ray wrote down the rules, guiding his decision making, and those pages would eventually become his world-famous book, Principles. 3 years after losing everything, Bridgewater won its first ever institutional client. $5 million to manage from the World Bank Employee Retirement Fund. Bridgewater Associates was no longer just a research firm. Now, it truly was a hedge fund. Ray was obsessed with studying market history and noticed that traditional portfolios were effectively making a single big bet that the future would resemble the past. Most portfolios were like a boat designed only for sunny days. So in 1990, Ray and his team built a portfolio designed to survive all possible economic environments. It became known as the all-weather portfolio. Bridgewater also created a fund called Pure Alpha, which took active, high-conviction bets on global markets using deep macro insights. Risky, but with potential for much higher returns. By the mid-2000s, Bridgewater was a runaway train, one of the most influential hedge funds in the world. For decades, Ray had been preparing for a crisis. He just didn't know when it would arrive. By 2007, Ray's models suggested the US was heading into a massive downturn, as people, companies, and governments had borrowed too much and would soon be forced to pay it back, all at the same time. When the 2008 crisis hit, the S&P 500 fell nearly 40% and many hedge funds collapsed. But Bridgewater's flagship strategy made money, a lot of money. This time, Ray was right, and it wasn't luck. It was the result of 25 years spent mapping cycles others ignored. The year after the crash, All Weather returned 11% and Pure Alpha returned an extraordinary 45%. Governments and central banks called for Ray's framework. Some began using his models before making policy decisions. But success brought scrutiny. Bridgewater's culture of transparency, taped meetings, and internal ratings was described by some as revolutionary and by others as extreme. Media outlets dissected it. Former employees debated it publicly. But Ray defended it as essential. By this point, Bridgewater could lose Ray Dalio for weeks, and the machine would still run. He continued studying markets, and by 2019, his focus narrowed on one country he believed would become the next global economic superpower: China. Ray began studying and visiting China in the 1980s, long before it became central to global markets. He visited every single year, meeting policymakers, traveling the country, and analysing its economic cycle. His influence expanded beyond markets, but in 2020, tragedy struck. Ray and his wife Barbara lost their eldest son, Devon, in a car accident at just 42 years old. The loss devastated the family and made everything else, money, markets, and success, feel irrelevant. In late 2021, Ray published The Changing World Order, extending his influence into geopolitics and the rise and fall of nations. World leaders increasingly sought his views, but as Ray aged, a new question emerged. What happens when the founder isn't there? Nearly 50 years after founding Bridgewater, Ray formally stepped aside. The system he built would now run without him. Ray and his wife signed the Giving Pledge, committing most of their wealth to philanthropy. One major focus became ocean exploration. Alongside his son, Mark, Ray founded OceanX, a project using advanced research vessels and submarines to explore the oceans and share discoveries through science and storytelling. Ray Dalio's life follows a pattern he often describes: pain, reflection, improvement. A lucky trade as a child, a humiliating collapse in his 30s, a rebuilt philosophy centered on radical transparency, a firm that became the largest of its kind, frameworks used by institutions worldwide, and a final chapter focused on giving back and exploring the unknown. Ray still meditates daily. He still studies markets with the intensity of someone who once bet everything and lost. He still believes the economy is a machine, complex, imperfect, but understandable. The open question is whether the world he's analysing next will behave the same way. Whatever his predictions, the life that produced them remains one of the most unusual and influential stories in modern finance. This is the history of Ray Dalio. Thanks for watching.